To make creme brulee, we'll need granulated sugar, pure vanilla extract, eggs, and whipping cream. The equipment needed for making creme brulee includes a heavy bottom saucepan. We'll need a liquid measuring cup, dry measuring cups, measuring spoons, custard cups, a wooden spoon, a rubber scraper, a whisk, a straight edge spatula. If an egg separator, if you have one, is quite handy. And then we also need some baking pans to put the souffle cups in, or sometimes those are souffle cups are referred to as ramekins. And then we need to have hot water, water that's already been heated, so I have the electric kettle to warm the water up so it's ready for the hot water bath when we place these in the oven. To begin making our creme brulee, I have put 4 cups of heavy cream in my heavy saucepan, and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of pure vanilla extract, and I'm going to turn the burner on to a medium-high heat. Medium-high is a 7 or 8, and because this pan is a little bit larger than that inner circle, I'm going to use the large burner. And then we're going to bring this to a boil, and we need to stir it constantly. We need to stir it constantly for a couple of reasons. We don't want, the biggest one is we don't want the milk solids to fall to the bottom of the pan and burn, because that would not, of course, be a very delicious dish. So we stir constantly so that it doesn't burn, but also we don't want a skin to form. So dairy products can at times, and this is more often when the product is cooling, dairy products can form a skin as they cool down. So this used to be really common when people made hot pudding at home and then let it cool down to eat it. Now that we have instant pudding, most people probably haven't seen a skin on a dairy product. But what happens is the proteins in the milk and the cream open up and they form a web that creates a solid surface on the top. You might have seen something similar, something on a small scale at the cup of hot chocolate that you've let sit, and then you come back and there's kind of like a little surface to it. So that would be a skin. But in our creme brulee and in warm puddings and other custards, you're going to need to make sure you prevent that from happening. So we stir constantly to prevent burning and to prevent a skin from forming. Because we're stirring constantly, I suggest you use a wooden spoon. First of all, wooden spoon's not going to do anything to harm this nonstick pan. Secondly, that's a lot of heat that's going to be in the pan, and you do not want your stirring utensil to transfer heat to your hand. And the wood will not transfer heat, so that makes it a good choice as well. As I mentioned, this is over a medium-high heat. We're going to bring it to a boil, and then we'll remove it from the heat. Medium-high is a 7 or 8 on a numbered dial, and we're going to stir this constantly. It's going to take a few minutes, so we'll come back to this when it has already started to boil. Okay, now that our creme brulee has come to a boil, you can see it's got lots of steam. Our cream and vanilla has come to a boil. We got lots of bubbles, really fast. We're going to turn that heat off, and we're going to move the pan off of the heat for about and we're going to set a timer for 15 minutes. And we're going to let that cool for about 15 minutes while we do a couple of other steps to prepare the recipe. So one of the first things we need to do while our cream mixture is cooling is we need to separate our 6 eggs, because the recipe only calls for the yolks. So whenever I separate eggs, I use 3 containers, especially if I'm separating more than one. I have 1 bowl or custard cup to crack the egg into. This is my egg separator. It catches the yolk. It lets the white drop through. I have 1 bowl or custard cup to move the egg whites to. And I have 1 bowl or custard cup to put the egg yolks in. And I'm going to put the egg yolks in this bowl so that I can use it as my mixing bowl also. And I'll save a dish. So I'm going to just crack the egg over the center of the egg separator. And use my rubber scraper to kind of encourage that white to drop off. Now, it's important that only the yolk goes in and that no yolk get in the white, because we can save these whites and freeze them. They freeze beautifully. And we can use them later in a recipe that only needs the whites. So the yolks do not freeze well. Whole eggs do not freeze well. But egg whites freeze beautifully. And you'll notice I move the egg white after each time I separate the egg. And that is so that if a drop of yolk were to get through on any given egg that I'm separating, it would only be that 1 white that I wouldn't be able to save. If I crack all 6 of these eggs and I don't move the whites, and egg number 6 just busts apart, then I've lost them all. So this way, at most, I'd have to lose 1 egg due to 1 egg's fat getting in it, yolk getting in it. A little bit of shell got in there. That's another reason we always use a custard cup for eggs, remember? So that if any shell gets in the egg, comes out with the egg, we can get it out of there more easily. So if you didn't have an egg separator, you could simply use the 2 halves of the shell to separate the egg. And these are fairly fresh eggs. They separate a little bit more easily. I'll do this last one without the egg separator. You can see I cracked the egg. Again, I'm working over that empty bowl. See if I can get that yolk to come back in there. There we go. So now I've got just yolk, so I'll put that in. And now I have 6 egg whites that I can freeze and save for another time. So we'll just set those aside. Now, my next step is to take my egg yolks and I need to whisk in a 1/2 cup of the sugar. There's my whisk. Beat the yolks together first. And by the way, this whole time I've had my oven preheating to 325 degrees so that it's ready to go. And I've also started the hot water that's going to create the water bath. That's heating up in the electric kettle. If you didn't have an electric kettle, you could just put some water in a saucepan. Just be careful how you transfer it. So I need to beat this, the egg and the sugar, until it's well blended and it just starts to lighten in color. So I want to get just a little bit of a lighter yellow color in here. And I still have about 8 minutes until my cream is finished, and I want to stir that occasionally so that no skin forms. If you have someone helping you, you can certainly take turns with beating the egg yolks with the whisk. You'll see it kind of thickens a little as you whisk it. So in a minute, we're going to start adding our cream just a little bit at a time. And we have to add it slowly because even though it will have been off of the heat for about 15 minutes, it's still really warm. And we don't want it to cook the egg when it comes in contact with it, because that'd be like putting scrambled eggs in the middle of your custard or pudding, and that would not be too good. So we have to add it very slowly so that it warms up the egg but doesn't cook the egg, and that's called tempering. So we're going to temper our eggs today to add them to the creme brulee. So we have a few minutes left until the cream is ready to add. So we'll come back when we're ready for that next step. Now that the 15 minutes have passed and our cream has had some time to cool, I'm going to get a ladle full of cream and just slowly drip it into my egg mixture while whisking. It's really important that you start this process slowly. We need to warm those eggs up. If you have a second person, you can have one person drip the cream in while the other person whisks. Again, you can take turns whisking. So once we get a lot of the cream in, then we'll be able to add it a little bit faster, but always while whisking. And we're just going to do a ladle full at a time. Now that that first ladle full is in, we can drizzle it a little more steadily. And we need to incorporate all of the cream into the eggs. So we're just going to continue to do this ladle by ladle until it's all in there. Now that we have all of the cream mixture incorporated to the egg mixture, it's time to transfer the creme brulee to the ramekins or the souffle cups. And I want to try to make sure that I get the same amount in each cup. So I'm going to put one ladle full in each of the 8 cups, and then I'll go back and add 2 of those. We want them to bake evenly at the same time. And so therefore, that's why we do one ladle. Make sure they all get that nice ladle full. So you can see I've placed my souffle cups in a 9x13 pan, but that only fits 6 of them. So I also have an 8x8 pan. The pans that I have are not large enough to fit 4. So you'll see this one really only accommodates 2. So that's why I have them separated like this. And they're in the baking pan because our creme brulee needs that moist heat baking again, a more gentle bake. And so we're going to put them in a water bath. But unlike molten lava cakes, with our creme brulee, the dish actually sits down in the water. So now I'm just topping off each of these cups, making them even as best I can so that they all bake at the same rate. And this is a long bake item. It's going to take about 40 minutes for these to bake. And then they'll need to chill at least 3 hours or overnight before we caramelize the sugar. We have more sugar in the recipe. You'll notice it was in there listed twice because some goes in the creme brulee and some goes on the creme brulee. And so we'll have to wait until tomorrow to, or at least 3 hours from now, to put it on top of the creme brulee and caramelize that sugar. So I'm going to clean up my pan here. My oven's been preheating to 325 degrees. So now we're going to transfer these to the oven. So you notice that I moved the pans without the water bath. Now I'm going to get that water that's already been heated. And notice how I have the pans spaced so that they are at least 2 inches away from the wall of the oven and at least 2 inches away from each other. I'm going to add enough heated water so that it fills my pans and comes about halfway full, about halfway up the ramekins or the souffle cups. And I want to make sure that I don't get it into any of the souffle cups. But you would not want to fill this and then move it because you do not want to get burned. So I pulled the rack out to make it easier. Your oven door should always be completely open so that you don't risk it closing on you and burning you that way. So now we're going to gently push this rack into the oven. Close the door. And the time says 40 to 45 minutes. So we're going to set our timer for 40 minutes. You always set the time for the lowest number in a time range because you can always add more time, but you cannot go back and unbake an item. So you can see our creme brulee has gotten a nice color on the top before it came out of the oven. We're going to take that last half cup of sugar and divide it up about a tablespoon per ramekin. We want to cover the top pretty thoroughly. Pretty evenly. Okay, so we got about a tablespoon of sugar on there. And now what really makes creme brulee, kind of the piece de resistance, is caramelizing the sugar on top. The easy way to caramelize the sugar on the top of several ramekins at once would be to put them on a tray, put them on a baking pan, put that baking pan in your oven under the broiler. And then you would need to turn the pan a couple of times just to make sure that they were evenly broiled. So everything got done and all the sugar got caramelized, but none of the sugar burnt. So that's the trick really at this point. So this should make a nice hard crack sugar, nice hard layer of sugar on the top. So the fun way to do this is with a torch, a kitchen torch. So I'm gonna press this in, and turn on the gas, hit the igniter, and then we're gonna caramelize the sugar. So it's really important that you keep that flame moving. Don't let it work one spot too long. You can see the sugar is starting to bubble. Just kind of, and we want to get a nice brown color on our sugar. Really bring out that superior flavor that caramelization can do. See, my sugar's boiling a little bit on top of my creme brulee. You do want to let your ramekins sit out of the refrigerator for about 30 minutes They have to cool down for 3 hours or overnight, and then they need about 30 minutes at room temperature before you broil to caramelize or torch. Just get that nice color. Keeping the torch on the sugar, but trying not to torch and warm up the custard that's beneath. So that's kind of a trick, and that's why we move it around in the broiler if we do it in the oven. So what we should find is that we'll let this cool off a little bit. You can see it's got that nice brown color. Where the sugar has caramelized. Try to make this a little bit easier for you to see. The ramekin does get hot, so you need to be really careful, but you can see that nice brown color that the sugar, that the heat has brought out of the sugar. And with that color comes flavor. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna give this one more little torching. See if I can't tease a little more color out of that sugar. A little more flavor. So now the goal is when we go through, the coolness of the custard should have created a sugar shell, basically, of our custard. Can kind of here, you can see that right here. There's a sugar shell that's been created, okay? And that, with a bite of the custard, is what makes creme brulee just such a delicious dish. So there's our creme brulee.